Forget the romance of the Caribbean. Forget noble pirates and their hearts of gold. The real story was far dirtier, more ruthless, and most importantly, infinitely more fascinating. Today we dissect one of the most enduring and scandalous legends that has persisted for centuries, the tale of Chevalier de Grammont. Étienne de Grammont, a name that, in the 1670s, struck terror into the Spanish colonies and brought nervous smiles to the French court. He was more than just an adventurer, more than a runaway nobleman. He was the living embodiment of an era when the lines between legality and piracy blurred, and personal gain seamlessly intertwined with state interests and ambitions. Born into a prominent French family, he seemed destined for a brilliant career at the court of Louis XIV himself, the Sun King. But his unruly temperament, a passion for card games that often led to significant losses, and endless duels that invariably left a bloody trail, quickly transformed him from a rising star into an outcast. Burdened not only by immense gambling debts, also, according to some compelling accounts, by accusations of murder, Grammont was forced to flee France. His path led across the ocean to the New World, a place where desperate individuals found either a last refuge or a new, often bloody, opportunity for reinvention. The Caribbean islands did not welcome him kindly, but it was here that Grammont truly unleashed his ruthless talent. He did not become just another freebooter, lost among hundreds of his kind. He was a born leader, a brilliant strategist, and a merciless tactician. Within a few years, he gathered scattered gangs of buccaneers and pirates under his command, transforming them into a disciplined, deadly force, capable of rivaling regular navies. His raids on Spanish possessions were audacious, lightning fast, and incredibly successful. In 1678, he plundered the wealthy Maracaibo, then devastated Gibraltar, and later, in 1683, carried out a daring, almost suicidal raid on Cartagena, cities considered impregnable bastions of Spanish colonial power. Each of his raids not only brought him untold riches and fame, it undermined Spanish strength in the region, paving the way for French expansion. Grammont operated with such efficiency and cruelty that even French governors, who officially condemned his actions and publicly disavowed him, secretly encouraged him, providing refuge, supplies, and even, according to some accounts, intelligence. From a fugitive criminal, he transformed into a living legend, a nightmare for the Spanish, and an unofficial, yet immensely valuable, agent of the French crown. His name was whispered on every island, feared across the entire continent. He became the embodiment of freebooter independence, a symbol of freedom and an indomitable spirit. Yet simultaneously, he became a crucial pawn in the great geopolitical game played by the powers. His successes were so astonishing that he began to pose a threat, not only to his enemies, but also to his tacit patrons. He was too powerful, too unpredictable, too famous to remain in the shadows. He ceased to be merely a tool. He became an uncontrollable factor. Then he vanished. In 1686, Chevalier de Grammont set sail on his flagship, the Augsburg, heading towards the shores of New Spain, and was never seen again. No wreckage, no bodies, not a single trace of his fate. Just a void that swallowed one of the Caribbean's most flamboyant and ruthless adventurers, leaving behind only conjecture and whispers. This is where the greatest mystification begins. Popular history, romanticized biographies, and even some academic works have for decades asserted the same narrative. Chevalier de Grammont perished in a terrible storm that sank his ship without a trace, or he fell in an unequal but heroic battle against a superior Spanish fleet, or simply vanished into the boundless expanse of the ocean, as befits a true, noble pirate. This is a beautiful fairy tale. It is a convenient legend, crafted to conceal an inconvenient, far more prosaic, and brutal truth. Chevalier de Grammont was no hero who perished in the elements or in battle, famed for his valor. His disappearance was the result of far more pragmatic and cold calculations, bearing no resemblance to romance. He was too dangerous, too influential, too independent to continue existing in the form he had created for himself. He was not swallowed by the ocean. He was swallowed by grand politics, the intrigues of powerful courts, and those who pulled strings from the shadows, controlling the destinies of thousands. This was no accident. It was a logical, inevitable end, instigated by those who had created and utilized him, once he ceased to be useful and became a burden or a threat. The mystery of his demise dissolves into the fog of grand politics. But an even deeper secret lies in his very birth, in the first steps along the path that led a nobleman from high society to the life of a freebooter. What drove Étienne de Grammont onto a path of self-destruction, and then onto a path of ruthless ascent? To answer this question, we must dissect not only historical facts, but also the very fabric of his personality, forged in the crucible of the 17th century. The son of Baron de Grammont, he belonged to one of France's most ancient and influential families. From his earliest days, he was destined for a life as a courtier, an officer, perhaps a diplomat. Versailles, its splendor, its intrigues, proximity to the Sun King. These were the horizons that opened before young Étienne. A path lay before him, paved with privileges but also constrained by the strictest rules. However, these golden chains seemed only to stifle his unruly nature, which from youth displayed an astonishing, almost pathological rejection of any confines. Instead of honing the art of courtly intrigue, he honed his sword, and far more dangerously, his cheating techniques. Every lost game, every duel ending in blood, was not merely a mistake or recklessness. These were defiant acts of disobedience, a challenge to the conventions that were meant to restrain him. His unruly temperament, which the court initially dismissed as youthful folly, quickly escalated into something more sinister. He didn't just break the rules, he despised them. His character revealed a deep, insatiable craving for thrills, bordering on self-destruction, a need to constantly prove his exceptionalism, his invulnerability. This trait, perhaps inherited from ancestors accustomed to boundless power, transformed into a destructive force within the strictly regulated court of Louis XIV. And when in 1670, just 6 years before his flight, his name became embroiled in a murder, not merely a quarrel, but a cold-blooded, cruel act that could not be dismissed as youthful passion, it became the harbinger of a definitive break. This was no accident. It was the culmination of his contempt for law and human life, the very point of no return. Murder accusations, immense gambling debts that were impossible to settle, all converged into a tight knot that could only be severed in one way, by flight. France, the court, his very name, all had become a prison. The ocean became not merely a path to salvation, but a road to true freedom, to a place where his ruthless talents would not be constrained by noble conventions. It was here, amidst the ruthless elements of the Caribbean, that the traits suppressed or distorted in Versailles finally emerged. His aristocratic education provided him with strategic thinking and an understanding of logistics and management. His habit of risk, honed at the card table and in duels, transformed into a steely composure in the face of mortal danger. His contempt for conventions became the foundation for establishing a new, self-imposed order amidst the chaos of freebooter gangs. He didn't merely become a pirate. He was reborn as a chieftain, a commander capable of bending the will of hundreds of desperate men to his own. His thirst for power, his insatiability, were not simply born of necessity. They were an extension of his character, which sought release from the societal confines imposed upon him. He didn't just plunder, he asserted himself, his will, his absolute freedom from any rules other than those he set for himself. Thus, Chevalier de Grammont was not a random product of Caribbean freebooting. He was its quintessence, a man whose destiny was forged not only by a thirst for gold, but also by a deeply rooted rebellion against his own predetermined fate. His cruelty, his genius, his defiance, all were the result of a complex blend of heredity, environment, and the fateful decisions that forever cut off his path back. It was this inner fire that made him so dangerous to those who sought to control him. In the 1670s, the Caribbean Sea was not merely a geographical region dotted with islands and trade routes. It was a boiling cauldron of geopolitical ambitions, a constantly smoldering fuse ready to ignite at any moment. Here, across the boundless expanses of the Atlantic, the leading European powers, Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands, waged a ruthless, often tacit, war for global dominance. Spain, once the undisputed master of the New World, whose crown controlled untold riches from Mexico to Peru, no longer possessed the unshakable might that allowed it to fully control its possessions. Its colonial empire, stretching for thousands of miles, was vast, but vulnerable. Gold and silver, sugar and tobacco, spices and valuable timber, all flowed in a stream to Europe on massive, yet slow, galleons transforming each Spanish trade convoy into a floating treasure chest, literally enticing prey. And its fortresses, though they seemed impregnable bastions, often suffered from a chronic shortage of garrisons, supplies, and political will from distant Madrid. Upon this weakness, like predators on a wounded beast, other powers pounced. France, under the scepter of Louis XIV, the Sun King, yearned to expand its overseas possessions, create a new, powerful colonial empire, and most importantly, undermine the Spanish influence that had dominated the region for centuries. England and the Netherlands pursued similar goals, vying for control over strategic trade routes and new, inexhaustible markets. However, a direct declaration of war or open military actions in Europe could lead to unpredictable consequences, disrupting the fragile balance of power and resulting in devastating conflicts on the continent. This is precisely why those whom history romanticized as pirates entered the game. Individuals who were, in reality, effective, albeit uncontrollable, instruments of grand politics, freebooters, buccaneers, privateers, people whose activities existed in the gray zone between legality and crime. The Caribbean islands became a refuge for all who sought quick profit, freedom from the rigid laws of the old world, or simply an opportunity to start a new life, even if it was at the point of a blade. Here gathered runaway soldiers, ruined noblemen, desperate criminals, experienced sailors, and deserters, people without a past and seemingly without a future, ready for anything for the sake of gold and survival. Centralized, effective authority was virtually non-existent in these distant frontiers. Spanish governors, though they held nominal control over their vast territories, could not effectively counter the constantly growing threat. French, English, and Dutch colonies, on the other hand, often became not merely refuges for these gentlemen of fortune, but also their supply bases, where they could repair ships, sell their plunder, and replenish their ranks. In essence, these colonial administrations performed the dirty work for their tacit patrons in Europe. Governments in Paris, London, and Amsterdam could not officially sanction raids and plunder against Spanish colonies, but they perfectly understood that the actions of freebooters weakened their main competitor and cleared the path for their own trade and colonial ambitions. Island governors, such as the shrewd French governor of Tortuga and Saint-Domingue, Bertrand d'Ogeron, actively encouraged and even supplied these independent sea robbers. They issued them so-called letters of marque, official documents that, in essence, legalized their piratical activities against enemy vessels and settlements, transforming bandits into a kind of private army. In return, the freebooters shared a portion of their plunder with the crown and its representatives, ensured the safety of trade routes for their respective countries, and served as a vanguard in an unofficial, yet exceedingly brutal, war. It was a cynical but highly effective system. Thus, the Caribbean Sea transformed into the Wild West of the 17th century, a place where the laws of the metropole held no sway, where might made right, and personal courage, strategic thinking, and ruthlessness were valued above titles and lineage. It was a unique, bloody ecosystem in which only the strongest and most cunning survived, where yesterday's fugitive could become tomorrow's king of his own small but deadly flotilla. It was this atmosphere, steeped in violence, greed, and a complete absence of moral compass, that became the ideal ground for the flourishing of figures like Chevalier de Grammont. He was not a random anomaly, out of context. He was a perfect product of his time, an embodiment of all its vices and opportunities, a man whose innate ambitions and ruthlessness found ideal application in this lawless and dangerous environment, created by history itself. It was in this ruthless environment that Étienne de Grammont honed his skills, transforming ordinary raids into meticulously planned, audacious operations bordering on genius. His name became synonymous not merely with luck, but with sophisticated calculation, enabling him to achieve incredible results that baffled even seasoned military strategists. One of his first and most illustrative grand schemes was the attack on the wealthy city of Maracaibo in 1678. This Spanish bastion, nestled deep within the eponymous lake, seemed impregnable, protected by a narrow, well-fortified strait that the Spanish considered a reliable trap for any enemy. But Grammont neither sought easy paths nor intended to follow a template. Instead of a frontal assault or a prolonged siege, he employed tactics of surprise and methodical psychological pressure. His fleet, composed of small but maneuverable vessels, slipped past coastal fortifications under the cover of night or fog, appearing before the city completely unexpectedly. The Spanish garrison, accustomed to sluggish skirmishes with rare privateers, was utterly unprepared for the methodical, ruthless siege and subsequent capture. Grammont didn't just take the city. He established his cruel yet effective order there, transforming it into an operational base for subsequent raids and a demonstration of his absolute power. He was in no hurry to depart, preferring to extract every last coin from the captured city, using threats, torture, and a ransom system to force residents to reveal hidden treasures. This was not merely a quick profit, but a cold-blooded demonstration of complete control, an act of humiliation for the Spanish crown, showing that its possessions were no longer safe, even in the most remote and seemingly protected corners. The next, even more audacious and large-scale scheme that shook the entire Caribbean basin and entered the annals of pirate history was the joint raid on Cartagena in 1683. Cartagena was the jewel of the Spanish crown, one of the most fortified and wealthy ports of the New World, a bastion considered impregnable for decades. Attacking it required not just courage, but unprecedented coordination, which was unthinkable for the disparate gangs of pirates who usually operated alone or in small groups. It was here that Grammont's genius as a leader and strategist, capable of thinking on the scale of a full-fledged military campaign, truly emerged. He managed to unite under his command the forces of several of the most influential freebooter captains, including legends like Laurent de Graff and Michel de Grammont, his cousin, bearing the same name, which often caused confusion in chronicles and created an additional aura of mystery around their lineage. He created an unprecedented fleet of over a dozen warships and an army of up to 1,200 men, a colossal force for that time and region. Their plan was audacious to the point of madness, to attack the city simultaneously from sea and land, utilizing surprise, superior firepower, and tactical superiority. Although the attack on Cartagena itself did not yield the same degree of material success in terms of plunder as Maracaibo, due to fierce resistance and the timely arrival of Spanish reinforcements, its strategic and symbolic significance was immense. This was not merely an attempt at robbery, it was a direct challenge, a powerful blow to Spain's prestige, demonstrating that even its primary strongholds were vulnerable in the face of united and well-organized freebooter might. But perhaps Chevalier de Grammont's most prolonged, cynical, and sophisticated scheme was his ability to skillfully balance between the status of an international criminal and an unofficial, yet immensely valuable, agent of the French crown. While Spanish authorities outlawed him, offering huge rewards for his head, French governors, such as the shrewd Bertrand d'Ogeron on Tortuga, turned a blind eye to his activities, and at times even directly supported him, providing refuge, supplies, and even intelligence. Grammont masterfully exploited this duality for his own ends. He perfectly understood that his raids, though acts of pure piracy, de facto served France's interests, weakening its main competitor in the region. He didn't just plunder, he conducted reconnaissance in force, providing valuable information about the state of Spanish fortifications and troop numbers, becoming an unspoken but effective tool of geopolitical struggle. He was too valuable to be abandoned to fate, yet too dangerous to be fully legalized and integrated into the structure of the Royal Navy. His ability to obtain supplies, shelter, and even unspoken protection, despite all his crimes and ill repute, was a testament to his exceptional skill in navigating a complex political game, where personal gain perfectly intertwined with state interests. He was the living embodiment of the gray zones of power, a man who transformed his own illegality into an instrument of state policy, proving his indispensability through destruction and terror, which made him an extremely convenient, but ultimately extremely dangerous asset for those pulling the strings from Versailles. Chevalier de Grammont's ability to unite disparate gangs into deadly flotillas and then transform them into an effective fighting unit was not merely the result of strategic genius or luck. It was a demonstration of his unique personal toolkit, a combination of psychological tactics, influence techniques, and a phenomenal capacity for adaptation that allowed him to dominate in the most ruthless conditions. He possessed a magnetic, almost hypnotic charisma that drew the most desperate and undisciplined individuals to him. He wasn't just another captain shouting orders. He was a storyteller, a visionary who sold his men not merely gold but a dream of boundless freedom and fabulous wealth, attainable only under his banner. He knew how to speak their language, understand their fears, and most importantly, their insatiable thirst for profit. His speech was a blend of blunt directness and promises that seemed so real they outweighed any risk. He didn't just promise a share of the plunder, he guaranteed it, backing his words with an impeccable track record, where every raid ended in triumph and full holds. This confidence, bordering on recklessness, infected his crews, transforming them from random adventurers into a devoted army, ready to follow him through fire and water. But charisma alone was not enough to keep hundreds of cutthroats, accustomed to anarchy, in check. Grammont was a master of a subtle yet ruthless game based on human weaknesses. He didn't just capitalize on greed, he cultivated it, transforming it into the driving force of his expeditions. His system for distributing plunder was transparent and, importantly, fair by his standards. Everyone knew they would receive their share, and this certainty was more potent than any threats. Yet simultaneously, he wielded fear. His reputation as a man who tolerated no disobedience was well known. Treachery or cowardice was punished immediately and mercilessly, often in front of the entire crew, setting a precedent that permanently quelled any inclination to mutiny. He didn't try to be a kind leader. He was an effective leader, and his effectiveness was based on a combination of generous promises and absolute cold cruelty. His influence techniques extended far beyond personal charm. Grammont perfectly understood that success depended not only on his will, but also on his ability to surround himself with competent individuals. He didn't just recruit sailors, he sought out experts. Whether experienced navigators, specialists in Spanish fortifications, skilled gunners, or even former officers with knowledge of regular army tactics. He granted them autonomy and responsibility, allowing them to prove themselves, but always kept them on a short leash, demanding unquestioning obedience to his overall strategy. For instance, his cousin Michel de Grammont, who often acted as his lieutenant, was not merely a relative, but a proven, reliable commander, capable of executing the most complex tasks. Grammont was not afraid to share power with those who had demonstrated their loyalty and competence, thereby forging a core of faithful and professional associates around him. He was also a master at generating buzz and maintaining his legend. Every successful raid was meticulously documented, to the extent possible at the time, and disseminated throughout the islands, acquiring new, often exaggerated details. Stories of his audacity, invulnerability, and the untold riches he acquired circulated among the freebooters, attracting more and more recruits eager to join his invincible flotilla. He transformed his actions into a spectacle, where each victory was a new act, solidifying his myth. But perhaps Chevalier de Grammont's most striking trait was his unprecedented capacity for adaptation. A nobleman destined to shine at court, he astonishingly easily acclimated to a world of violence and lawlessness. He learned from his mistakes, analyzed failures and successes, constantly refining his tactics. Yesterday's duelist, accustomed to the sword, transformed into a naval commander capable of leading complex maritime operations. The gambler who lost fortunes became a strategist, calculating risks with a mathematician's cool precision. He didn't just survive in the chaos of the Caribbean, he thrived in it, transforming from a fugitive outcast into a dominant figure who not only exploited the system, but also shaped it to his will, using his innate talents and acquired skills to achieve absolute control over his environment and his destiny. Chevalier de Grammont's ability not just to survive, but to dominate in the bloody anarchy of the Caribbean did not go unnoticed. Behind his back, in the shadow of palm trees and beyond the walls of royal palaces, stood those who reaped maximum benefit from his ruthless efficiency, and also those who cursed his name, being victims of his audacity. The primary beneficiary and unspoken patron of Grammont was, undoubtedly, the French crown, represented in the Caribbean by its colonial administrators. Louis XIV, the Sun King, could not officially sanction pirate raids on the possessions of the Spanish crown. That would have been a direct declaration of war, with unpredictable consequences for European politics. But it was vitally necessary for him to weaken Spain, undermine its monopoly on the riches of the New World, and clear the path for French expansion. This is where figures like Bertrand d'Ogeron, the governor of Tortuga and Saint-Domingue, came into play. This shrewd and cynical administrator didn't just turn a blind eye to the privateers' activities, he actively cultivated them, transforming them into an effective tool of foreign policy. D'Ogeron and governors like him issued letters of marque that, in essence, legalized the plunder of Spanish ships and cities. They provided refuge, supplies, and repair facilities for the vessels of Grammont and his associates. Moreover, They sometimes furnished him with valuable intelligence regarding the routes of Spanish galleons and the state of garrisons in key cities. This was a mutually beneficial, albeit deeply immoral, symbiosis. Grammont received resources and protection, while France gained the weakening of its main rival and a flow of indirectly acquired wealth, all without deploying its own regular troops. Chevalier de Grammont was an ideal asset, noble enough to possess connections, ruthless enough to be effective, and insubordinate enough to be disavowed if politically expedient. He was the living embodiment of the gray area where state interests intertwined with blatant criminality. On the opposite side of this bloody chessboard was Spain, a once mighty empire whose dominions stretched from Mexico to Patagonia. For the Spanish, Chevalier de Grammont was not merely a pirate, but a true scourge of God, an embodiment of anarchy, and a threat to their centuries-old colonial system. Every one of his raids, whether on Maracaibo, Gibraltar, or Cartagena, inflicted not only material damage, but also a devastating blow to the crown's prestige. Spanish governors and admirals, unlike their French counterparts, could not utilize Grammont. Their objective was to destroy him. They outlawed him, offered exorbitant bounties for his capture, and dispatched squadrons to intercept his fleets. Yet Grammont, with his lightning-fast tactics and phenomenal ability to vanish after raids, always remained one step ahead. Spanish bureaucracy, slow decision-making, and chronic resource shortages in remote outposts only exacerbated their inability to effectively counter this threat. For Madrid, Grammont was not just a criminal, but a symptom of a systemic crisis eroding their colonial empire. His successes undermined not only their treasury, but also faith in the invincibility of Spanish arms, sowing panic among the populace and paralyzing trade. He was a living nightmare who fit none of their military doctrines, a man who operated by his own ruthless rules. Thus, Chevalier de Grammont existed at the heart of a complex, multi-layered web of power and opposition. He was a key figure in the undeclared war between European powers, a tool in the hands of some and a mortal enemy to others. His name became a symbol not only of buccaneer freedom, but also of cynical, ruthless politics, where human lives and destinies were mere pawns in the grand game for global dominance. It was this position,